The rich, earthy aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, a scent that usually served as my morning anchor. I stood at the center island, running my palm over the smooth, cool surface of the custom walnut countertop I had installed with my own hands just 6 months ago. Sunlight streamed through the energy-efficient windows I had framed and hung, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the quiet air. It was the day after my grandfather Harlan's funeral, and the farmhouse felt strangely hollow without the sound of his shuffling footsteps overhead or the crackle of his radio in the den. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looking out at the overgrown fields through the glass, wondering how I would manage the property taxes alone, but determined to honor his legacy. The fragile peace was shattered when the front door slammed open, vibrating the walls. Heavy, mud-caked boots stomped across the pristine hardwood floors I had spent 3 agonizing weeks sanding and staining by hand until my knees were bruised and raw. My Aunt Maura marched into the kitchen, her face set in a mask of faux sympathy that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. She didn't knock. She didn't say hello. She walked straight to the island and slapped a piece of paper onto the polished wood with a sharp thwack. 30-day notice to vacate, the bold header read in stark black ink. I stared at it, the coffee turning sour and acidic in my stomach. "Maura, what is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Grandpa just died yesterday." Maura sneered, looking around the kitchen with open disdain. "This house is the only asset of value in the estate, Valen. I'm the executor. I'm selling it." "You have 30 days to get your trash out." I looked at her, stunned by the cruelty. "Trash! I rebuilt this place from a rotting shell. I live here." Maura laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the room. "And you did a cute job. It'll make me a fortune. Pack your bags." I tried to reason with her, desperate to make her see the reality of the situation. I pulled out my phone, opening the detailed spreadsheet where I tracked every single dollar I had spent on the house over the last 5 years. I turned the screen toward her. "Maura, look at the numbers," I pleaded, my voice rising. "I poured $150,000 of my own money into this place. That's my savings, my inheritance from my mom. I put in thousands of hours of labor. The electrical, the plumbing, the roof, I paid for all of it. I wasn't asking for the house for free. I just wanted recognition, a conversation, or at least a share of the sale to cover my massive investment." Maura waved her hand dismissively, not even glancing at the screen or the receipts I was trying to show her. "You lived here rent-free while you played carpenter, Valen. That was your payment. Consider the improvements a gift to the estate." She walked over to the custom cabinets, tapping a long, manicured fingernail against the wood, making a clicking sound that grated on my nerves. "Honestly, I'm going to have to redo this kitchen anyway. It's too rustic. It looks cheap. The buyer will probably gut it for something modern." My blood began to boil. Those were custom walnut cabinets, built with joinery techniques that took years to master. She was calling my life's work cheap while simultaneously planning to profit from the value it added. "It's not a gift," I said through gritted teeth, stepping closer to her. "It's my equity." Maura just smirked, checking her watch. "Not on paper, it isn't. You have 29 days left." 2 days later, while I was wrapping my books in newspaper and fighting back tears, Maura returned. This time she brought a man with her, Coulter, a high-end real estate agent known for selling luxury estates in the county. They walked in without knocking, acting as if I were a ghost or a squatter in my own home. I stood in the hallway, holding a heavy box of Harlan's journals, forced to listen as Maura gave him the grand tour. Coulter was clearly impressed by what he saw. He ran his hand appreciatively along the curved banister of the spiral staircase. "The vintage woodwork is stunning," he remarked, looking up at the loft. "And this staircase? It adds 50,000 to the value alone. It's a showstopper." I stepped forward, wanting to scream that I had bought that staircase kit and assembled it piece by piece, bolt by bolt. I wanted to tell him about the sweat and the pinched fingers, but Maura cut me off before I could speak. "Yes," she preened, smoothing her silk scarf and smiling like the lady of the manor. "We kept it in the family. My father always had such good taste." She completely erased my contribution. She took credit for the light fixtures I rewired, the floors I laid, and the walls I plastered. Coulter nodded, taking notes on his iPad. "This is $1 million property, easy," he said. Maura's eyes lit up with unadulterated greed. I was a ghost in my own home, haunting the halls I had built while they calculated their commission on my hard work. That night, consumed by heartbreak and a simmering anger, I went down to the basement. It was damp and smelled of earth and old concrete, the only part of the house I hadn't finished restoring yet. I sat on the cold floor in front of Grandpa Harlan's old, dented metal filing cabinet. I needed to find his will, to see if there was anything I had missed, any loophole that could save me. I dug through dusty folders of old tax, returns from the 90s and vet bills for dogs long past, until my fingers brushed against a thick, sealed manila envelope labeled House Agreement. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled it out and sliced it open. Inside was a legal document from 5 years ago, signed by both me and Grandpa Harlan. I had completely forgotten about its existence. It was a renovation agreement we drafted when I first moved in. Harlan, worried about Medicaid taking the house if he went into nursing care, wanted to protect my financial investment in the property. I read the clauses, my breath catching in my throat as the legal jargon turned into salvation. Clause 4 stated clearly, any fixtures, materials, or structural additions paid for and installed by Valen remain her personal chattel property until the estate reimburses her in full for the cost of materials and labor. It was a lifeline thrown from the grave. I grabbed my phone and called Thayer, my childhood friend who is now a contract lawyer. "Thayer," I whispered, clutching the paper like gold. "Does this hold up?" Thayer came over the next morning before his firm opened. He sat at the kitchen island, reviewing the document with a serious expression, tracing the lines with his pen. After 10 agonizing minutes of silence, he looked up and grinned, a look of pure shark-like delight. "Valen, this is ironclad. It explicitly separates the improvements from the real estate. Legally. The house structure is the shell belonging to the estate. But everything you added, the cabinets, the wiring, the plumbing, the tub, is considered your personal property, just like a sofa or a lamp, unless they pay you for it." We drafted a formal demand letter immediately, wording it with brutal precision. Pursuant to the attached agreement, I demand reimbursement of $180,000 for materials and labor invested in the property at 124 Oak Lane. Failure to reimburse will result in the removal of said personal property prior to vacancy. We sent it via certified email and text message to ensure there was a paper trail. Mora's response came within the hour. She didn't call her lawyer. She didn't pause to think. She just texted back, arrogant and dismissive. "I'm not paying you a dime. Take your property and get out. I want the house empty by the 30th. She thought property meant my clothes and books. She had no idea she had just authorized the systematic deconstruction of her $1 million listing. I decided to try one last diplomatic approach, mostly for my own conscience. I met Mora and her son, Ferris, in the driveway when they came to put up the for sale sign. Ferris was leaning against his shiny new truck, already spending the inheritance money in his head. He looked at the house with greedy eyes. "Mora," I said calmly, standing between them and the porch. "If I take my property, the house won't be the same. It won't sell for $1 million. Just pay me for the materials. That's all I ask. Keep the labor costs. Just pay for the wood and wire." Ferris laughed, spitting on the gravel near my boots. "Nobody wants your DIY projects, Valen. Take your trash. We want the shell so we can flip it to a developer anyway. We don't care about your little hobby farm." Mora nodded in agreement, looking at me like I was a beggar. "You heard him. Take your trash. I want this place swept clean. Nothing left behind." I pulled my phone out of my pocket, stopping the recording I had started when I walked up. I had them on tape calling my work trash and ordering me to remove it. "Okay," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I'll take my trash." The next morning, I started making calls. I had worked in restoration and carpentry for 10 years. I knew every tradesman in town, electricians, plumbers, cabinet makers, drywallers. I called Miller, the master electrician who taught me how to wire a 3-way switch. I called Silas, the plumber who helped me drag the cast iron pipes out. I called the crew who helped me raise the barn roof. "I need a favor," I told them, "and I'm paying double rate for a rush job." I explained the situation. I showed them the contract Harlan had signed and Mora's text message authorizing me to remove my property. The anger on their faces mirrored my own. These men had eaten lunch at my table. They respected the work and the legacy of the house. "We aren't going to vandalize it," I clarified, looking each of them in the eye. We are going to deconstruct it. Professional removal, surgical precision. I want every screw, every wire, and every board saved." They nodded, understanding the assignment. The crew was assembled. Operation Clean Sweep began. Day one of the removal began at 7:00 a.m. sharp. The crew arrived in 3 heavy-duty trucks, the sound of engines breaking the morning silence. We started with the kitchen, the heart of the home, and the source of Mora's specific insult. My team of carpenters moved with practiced efficiency. They unscrewed the custom walnut cabinets from the walls, carefully wrapping them in thick moving blankets to prevent scratches. They disconnected the high-end Viking range and the Sub-Zero fridge I had saved for 3 years to buy. We removed the farmhouse sink, capping the pipes temporarily to prevent leaks. We took the marble backsplash tiles, chipping them off carefully to salvage as many as possible, stacking them in crates. By noon, the kitchen that Mora had called cheap was gone. All that remained were bare studs, the subfloor, and the original water-stained drywall from 1950. It looked like a skeleton, a rib cage without a heart. I felt a pang of sadness seeing it stripped, but then I remembered Ferris calling it trash, and the resolve hardened in my chest like concrete. Day 5 brought the plumber, Silas. This was the most invasive part of the process and required the most skill. Since I had paid for the repiping of the entire house, replacing the old, rusted galvanized pipes with modern copper, the copper belonged to me. We shut off the main water valve at the street to prevent flooding the basement. Then, Silas and his apprentice went to work. The sound of the reciprocating saw echoed through the house as they cut the pipes cleanly at the wall joints. They pulled the long copper lines from the basement ceiling, coiling the soft copper and stacking the hard pipe. They disconnected the tankless water heater I had installed last winter. Upstairs, the vintage clawfoot tub, which I had spent weeks refinishing to a porcelain shine, was lifted onto a heavy-duty dolly and rolled out the door. The toilet, the sinks, the brass faucets, everything was loaded into the trailer. The house was now effectively dry. No water ran through its veins. It was beginning to die. Next came the electrical. Miller, the electrician, looked at the breaker panel and hesitated for a moment. "You sure about the wiring, Valen? This is extensive. It's going to leave the place dark." I pulled out the receipt for 5,000 feet of Romex wire. "I paid for it, Miller. Every foot. It goes." We didn't strip the walls open violently. We used the conduit paths I had installed during the renovation. We attached pull strings to the wires and pulled them back through the conduit, coiling the expensive yellow and white wire onto spools. We took the breaker box panel, leaving only the meter outside, which belonged to the utility company and was illegal to touch. Inside, we unhooked the antique chandeliers and the recessed lighting cans. The house grew darker by the hour as the sun moved across the sky. Without the wiring, the switches on the walls were just useless plastic rectangles. We took those too, leaving rectangular holes in the drywall. The flooring was my pride and joy, reclaimed oak boards I had hand-planed and stained myself. It was wood salvaged from an old mill, thick and full of history. Luckily, I had installed them as a floating floor system over a cork underlayment, specifically to preserve the original subfloor. This made removal tedious but possible without destroying the material. My crew and I spent 3 days unzipping the floorboards one by one. We numbered them on the back with chalk so they could be reassembled later like a puzzle. We bundled them and loaded them into the long trailer. As the last board was lifted, the acoustics of the room changed completely. The sound was hollow and harsh. The house was now walking on plywood subflooring, ugly and rough. The warmth was gone, replaced by the smell of old dust and exposed wood. The final piece was the staircase. It was a magnificent spiral structure made of cast iron and oak, a kit I had bought and assembled in the living room. It was the centerpiece Coulter had raved about, the thing that gave the house its $1,000,000 feel. But because it was a kit, it was bolted together, not welded into the structure. It was furniture, technically. It took 4 men and a system of pulleys to disassemble it safely. We removed the oak treads first, then the iron railing, and finally the central column. As the last piece was carried out the front door, I looked up. The second floor was now a loft with no access. A gaping hole in the ceiling marked where the stairs had been. The only way up was a ladder. The house was broken. It was no longer a home. It was a box. It was day 29. The house was empty, truly empty. No doors. I took the solid wood doors I had hung. No trim, no light switches, no plumbing fixtures, just a wooden skeleton of studs and plywood. It smelled of sawdust and old, stagnant air. I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the silence. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a barn, just as Ferris had wanted. I prepared for the handover. I left a sturdy construction ladder leaning against the loft opening so Maura could get upstairs for her inspection. I swept the subfloors clean. I wanted no debris. I wanted her to see that I had followed her instructions to the letter. The house was swept clean. I locked the original, rotting front door, the only thing I had left behind because it was original to the house, and waited in my truck at the end of the driveway, watching the road. The next morning, Maura pulled up in her silver Mercedes. She wasn't alone. She had the buyer with her, the wealthy out-of-towner Coulter had found, a man named Mr. Sterling who was expecting a turnkey vintage farmhouse. I watched from down the road as they got out of the car. Maura was beaming, pointing at the exterior, talking about the charm and the history. They walked up the porch steps. Maura fumbled with the key in the lock, struggling with the old mechanism. She finally pushed the door open. I saw them step inside. I saw the moment they frozen. The sunlight streamed into an empty cavern. The echo of their footsteps must have sounded terrifying. It was dark. There were holes in the walls where outlets used to be. The kitchen was a void. The shock radiating from them was visible even from a distance. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw the body language. Mr. Sterling threw his hands up in the air. He walked a circle in the living room, pointing at the floor, then at the hole in the ceiling where the stairs should be. Maura was frantic. She was spinning around, looking for something, anything. Then she pulled out her phone. My phone rang. I answered calmly. "Hello, Maura. You destroyed the house," she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical, vibrating in my ear. "I'm calling the police. You vandalized everything. Where's the kitchen? Where are the stairs? Where is the plumbing?" "I didn't destroy anything, Maura," I replied, my voice cool. "I removed my personal property as you instructed in writing. You told me to take my trash. I did." "This isn't trash. This is the house," she shrieked. "Not according to our contract," I said, and hung up. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. Maura had called 911 claiming burglary and massive vandalism. I drove my truck up the driveway to meet them. I stepped out, holding a thick binder of documents. 2 officers approached, looking confused by the scene of the screaming woman in heels and the empty house. "Officer, arrest her," Maura yelled, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "She stripped the house. She stole everything." The sergeant looked at me, then at the house. "Ma'am," I opened the binder. I showed him the renovation agreement signed by the original owner. I showed him the receipts for every single item removed, the wire, the pipes, the wood. I showed him Maura's text, "Take your property and get out." "Officer," I said, "this is a civil dispute regarding personal property ownership. I have proof that everything removed belongs to me." The sergeant looked at the empty shell, then at the paperwork. He turned to Maura. "Ma'am, she has proof of ownership. We can't arrest her for taking her own property. This is a civil matter." Mr. Sterling had seen enough. He walked up to Maura, his face red with anger and disbelief. "You listed a 4-bedroom luxury farmhouse," he spat. "This is a shell. It's a barn. This is fraud. I'm suing you for my deposit and I'm walking away." He got into his luxury SUV and sped off, kicking up gravel and dust. Maura watched him go, her face pale. She had just lost an $850,000 offer. The fortune she had bragged about was driving away. She turned to me, her eyes filled with hate. "I will ruin you," she hissed. "I will sue you for every penny." "You can try," I said, "but you might want to call a contractor first. It looks like it's going to rain and the roof vents are open." The situation got worse for Maura. Because the electrical panel and the main plumbing lines were gone, the house technically had no utilities. The city inspector, a man named Dave who I had worked with closely during the renovation, happened to drive by after seeing the police cars. He stopped to check on the commotion. He walked through the house, shaking his head at the emptiness. "No water, no power, open sewage lines where the toilets were. This isn't safe," he muttered. He walked out to his truck, grabbed a bright orange sticker and slapped it on the front door. condemned unsafe for occupancy. The house wasn't just empty, it was legally uninhabitable. Maura now owned a condemned shell that she couldn't sell, couldn't rent, and couldn't even insure because insurance companies don't cover condemned properties. She was the queen of a ruin. Maura sued me, of course. She filed a lawsuit for destruction of property and diminution of value, claiming I had reduced the value of the estate by $500,000. The case went to mediation first. We sat in a sterile conference room, Maura, her lawyer, Thayer, and me. Maura looked haggard. She hadn't slept in weeks. Thayer laid out our defense. He presented the renovation agreement. Then he projected Maura's text message onto the screen. "Take your property and get out. I want the house empty." My client followed the executor's instructions perfectly, Thayer argued. She removed her property. The fact that the executor did not understand the extent of that property is not my client's liability. The mediator looked at the text, then at Maura. "You really sent that?" He asked. Maura nodded, defeated. The mediator closed his file. "I suggest you settle," he told her. "You won't win this in court." Then came the financial reveal. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, Thayer found something interesting. It turned out Maura had already spent the money she expected to get. She had taken out a high-interest bridge loan against the expected sale price of the house to pay off her own gambling debts in Las Vegas. She owed the bank $200,000, due in full upon the sale of the house. With the sale dead and the house condemned, the bank was calling the loan. Maura was hemorrhaging money. She was paying interest on a loan she couldn't repay for a house she couldn't sell. She was trapped in a financial vice of her own making. The fortune she tried to steal from me had turned into an anchor dragging her down. Desperate to save the asset, Maura tried to hire contractors to fix the house. She needed to put it back together to make it sellable again. But she lived in a small town. Word travels fast among the trades. Every contractor she called knew me. They knew what she had done. When the electricians and plumbers came out to quote the job, they gave her what we call asshole prices. They quoted her triple the normal rate. To rewire the house, $40,000. To replumb it, $30,000. To rebuild the kitchen, $80,000. The total estimate to restore the house to its previous condition was nearly $250,000. Maura didn't have the money. She sat on the porch of the empty house and cried, realizing the scale of what she had lost. 3 months passed. The house sat rotting, the orange sticker fatting in the sun, peeling at the corners. Maura was out of options. She called me one evening. She sounded broken, her arrogance completely gone. "Valen," she said, "just put it back, please. If you put it back, I can sell it and we can split the money. I'll give you half." I sat in my new apartment, surrounded by my boxes of fixtures. "No," I said simply. "I've already installed the kitchen in my new place." It was a lie, the cabinets were in storage, but it was a necessary power move. "I'm not doing the work twice, Maura. You wanted the shell. You have the shell. I hope you enjoy it." I hung up, feeling the weight of the last few months lift off my shoulders. Maura defaulted on the bridge loan. She couldn't make the payments. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the estate property. It was a tragedy for the family legacy, but it was the only way to break the deadlock. The bank seized the property, kicking Maura off the deed. But banks don't want stripped, condemned farmhouses in the middle of nowhere. They are liabilities. They just wanted to get it off their books. They put it up for auction as distressed land value only. The listing described it as a teardown candidate. The beautiful home I had built was now officially worthless in the eyes of the market. The auction was held on the courthouse steps on a rainy Tuesday. I was there, standing in the back in my raincoat, blending in with the gray morning. Ferris was there, looking angry but helpless, his truck likely repossessed. Maura didn't show up. She couldn't bear the shame. The auctioneer opened the bidding at $100,000, essentially just the value of the land. No one else bid. The developers didn't want it because the demolition costs for the ruined house were too high and the location was too remote. I raised my hand. $100,000, I said. Going once, going twice, sold. I bought the property back for a fraction of what Maura tried to sell it for. The money Maura's estate did get from the auction went entirely to paying off her bridge loan and legal fees. She walked away with zero. Actually, less than zero. She still owed her lawyer. Springtime arrived, bringing warmth back to the valley. I was back in the farmhouse. The driveway was full of trucks again, my crew. We were working in reverse this time. The smell of sawdust was fresh and hopeful. We were reinstalling the staircase. The cast iron rang out as we bolted it back into place. The copper pipes were brazed back together, the torch hissing a song of renewal. The walnut cabinets were hung on the walls, fitting perfectly into their original spots. By summer, the house was whole again. I sat on the front porch, drinking coffee, watching the sunset over the fields. I owned the house, the land, and every nail in the walls, free and clear. Maura was right about one thing when she called it a shell. It was just a shell without me, but she forgot that I was the soul. And the soul always finds its way back home.